Hey everyone, Agu here. It's Politics stream number 12, which is pretty good, better than 11. We're going to be covering something very awesome today. The moment I saw this, I was like, oh yeah, I gotta cover this. I gotta cover this, man. It's too good. It's too good. So, I've never said it on camera, but I've said it to my friends and, other people online, and, I even thought it to myself. That debating with the right wing, I think, is really, really beneficial for our movement because I think we can expose their foolish ideas on like a stage, a big stage, and maybe convert some people from the right to the left. Because when I first got into politics, I'm 23 now. I got into politics probably at 18 or 19. I think 19. 18, let's say 18. I was pretty dumb, I was a dumb teenager. And, I was one of those anti-SJW types. I don't think I would call myself conservative. I thought I was conservative because I didn't like misandrists and racist people who were racist towards white people. Like, I thought that made me a conservative. But you know how I got deconverted? Was when I saw Jordan Peterson debating Sam Harris. And then that planted doubt in my head about the whole conservative movement. And then I saw him debate this atheist guy called Mark Delahunty, where he got destroyed. And I'm not an atheist myself, and I'm an agnostic person. It means I don't really care or don't know if there's a higher power. But Jordan had some terrible arguments. Like all atheists are murderers, and the atheists that are not murderers are actually Christians. Things like that. You can't quit smoking without a religious experience. Like all those crazy things, right? Made me kind of woke me up to, wow, this guy's dumb. And then bit by bit I went to the left, and now here I am. An anti-capitalist socialist guy now. What a transformation. But that wouldn't have happened, in my opinion, because without the debating. So this is really, really good. Really, really good, I think. And I'm pretty sure Ana Kasparian is going to do well, because I saw TYT Cenk do a little video on it, and I saw a little bit of him saying, oh, she did great. I was like, okay, so I got to watch this. So yeah, enough with the intro. Let's get into it. I'm excited, man. Always nice to see Squeaky Ben get wrecked, man. Alright. Okay, everything's set. Everything's ready. Y'all can see it. Good. Alright, I'm gonna full screen this now. And headphones. Alright, so before I start this, shout out to Little Mac. He's the guy who's put it on his stream. He streamed it. He put it on YouTube. If he sees this, I hope you're okay with me reacting to it. Thanks for putting this up, skipping all the other stuff and just getting straight to the debate. I don't want to give Ben Shapiro a view because I saw this debate on his channel too, so I don't want to watch it on this guy. So Little Mac, shout out to Little Mac.
But we're going to have a great conversation tonight with Ben and Ana. I'm looking forward to it. I know all of you are too because we've been talking to you. So let's kind of start off. Let me ask each of you to introduce the other. Ben, would you like to introduce Ana?
Oh,
sure.
This guy has his thoughts.
This is Ana Kasparian. She is, first of all, big round of applause for Ana because this is a Chamber of Commerce meeting.
Okay.
Ana's quite famously a Bernie Sanders supporter, so it takes a lot of guts to get up in front of a business audience, and she really deserves a lot of credit for that, for sure. She's the co-host of the immensely popular Young Turks, which is a show you can find on YouTube. It's also a podcast, and it's available pretty much everywhere. And she is also the producer of that show, executive producer of that show.
Thank you, Ben.
Nice.
Ana, your turn.
Good to be polite.
All right. First of all, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, and everyone's been so hospitable and incredibly polite and nice, and I really appreciate that. Ben, I just found out, based on what Jean told me, suggested me to be part of this conversation, and I really appreciate that. Ben is the co-founder of the Daily Wire, incredibly well known, especially in the media space, the new media space specifically, but he's certainly made his rounds in traditional media as well. And he has really popularized a lot of conservative ideals, conservative beliefs that I think were getting a little played out by some of the old guard of conservatism. So, Ben is known for being sharp, being able to defend his viewpoints without, engaging in personal attacks. So I'm looking forward to having this conversation with Ben and, sharing our ideas with one another and, with everyone here. So thank you for having me.
Well, we love civility, so thank you.
Of course you love civility. Okay. I don't
So
really,
for those of
but-
you who looked at it, our topic is leading political voices of the next generation of leaders. So you're thought leaders within your individual, within your generation, a generation that's much younger than mine. What would you like the people of your generation to know moving forward? Ana, let's start with you.
Well, I think that my generation is certainly pretty passionate about changing things, certainly changing the way that they work and live. We're seeing that play out currently with the pandemic and the labor shortage that's taking place. And I'd like them to know that we don't really need to reinvent the wheel. We've seen strategies and solutions that have worked in the past. This country has gone through many terrible things in its history. It's a very short history, relative to other countries. And despite all of those awful things that have happened, things like the Great Depression, for instance, the country was still able to pull through. And I would suggest looking to history at the solutions that worked, specifically a strong labor movement, in order to, really rework the power dynamic that we're seeing right now in the workplace. I think a lot of the reasoning for not going back to the jobs that workers were previously working in prior to the pandemic has to do with the fact that, hey, we've been staying home during the lockdown. Now we realize that spending time with our family, having a little free time for ourselves, being able to go outdoors and do recreational things, that's important to us. So they're reimagining what their lives could be like if they take a little bit of power back in the workplace. And I think that that's definitely possible. They just got to fight for it. They got to organize. They got to work together and not get distracted by manufactured culture wars that we see play out in the media every day.
Ben, how about the folks on your side?
So, I think that for folks on my side, I sort of have the same message for everybody on all sides, which is that the world did not begin spinning when you were born. And there's a great amount of wisdom, accumulated wisdom, that has built up over literally thousands of years, in the United States over hundreds of years, that is well worth going back to as a source of both inspiration and understanding of exactly why the system is supposed to work in a particular way. And that requires a certain understanding of human nature, of human beings, as both capable of amazing things, but also as inherently flawed and ambitious, and why you need a governmental system that is capable of checking ambition with ambition, checks and balances, subsidiarity, the belief in a federalist system that allows for experimentation on a local level without attempting to cram one-size-fits-all solutions on everybody from the federal level. But that begins with reading history. It does begin with understanding some basic philosophies about how the United States works, because if it feels like the country is coming apart, and it really does feel.
Ben is the same guy who said that the U.S. is based on Judeo-Christian values when it's based on the writings of people like Locke and people from the French Revolution. That type of I don't know what period you call it, the Enlightened period. Those people type of thinking. So yeah, Ben should read some history. I'm not even kidding. It's a little bit. I wouldn't say that he's a history student all the time. He kind of picks what suits him the best. And he has lied like that before.
I feel like that more and more every day. That is because I think that there is a failure to agree on some of the central bases for the country. So we're either going to have to clarify where the disagreements are, or we're going to be in serious trouble as a country.
I love the answers because it leads directly into what I want to ask you about next. This is going to be the most obvious statement I'm going to make tonight. The last 18 months have seen significant turmoil, not only with COVID, but with our social, our cultural upheavals, as we've seen people, protesting some just horrible, egregious acts. As you noted, the future of work, how we work, all those things are out there for discussion. Trust in institutions, and trust or an understanding, as Ben said, of literally the basis of our society. I saw a great quote. We've had the 1619 Project, we've had the book called 1620, 1776 Commission, all of them designed to push back on that. I saw a great quote from a noted political scientist who said, "America is not a lie, but a disappointment because it is a hope." Would you agree that's a good description, and would you also agree that the U.S. is an exceptional country? Ben, I'll start with you.
I obviously believe that the United States is an exceptional country. I think that our history is filled with moments of glory. It's also filled with some terrible tragedy and some terrible evil. There's no question about any of that. To suggest that America is a disappointment is to suggest that utopia is a real place, or that whenever you say somebody's a disappointment, you have to say compared to what? And what exactly are you shooting for? Compared to the ideal, of course, everybody's a disappointment. Saints are disappointments compared to the ideal. But if what you're talking about is America as a whole is somehow disappointing compared to, for example, what other countries around the world stand for, or what they have provided to their citizens, or what they have provided to the globe, then by no means is America a disappointment. America is a tremendous success story.
Oh boy, medical bankruptcy is the number one bankruptcy, right? Like, let me. Like, I gotta prove this to you guys so you don't think I'm just BSing. Medical bank. Yeah, okay, so a 2009 study of all bankruptcies in 2007, researchers classified as medical bankruptcy as one where persons had mortgaged mortgaged a home to pay medical bills, had medical bills that greater than 1,000, or had lost at least 2 weeks of work due to illness. According to the definition, 62.1% of all bankruptcies in the United States were medical bankruptcies. A 2015 study by the Kaiser Family Foundation found that medical bills caused 1 million US adults to declare bankruptcy every year. That 26% of Americans aged 18 to 64 struggle to pay medical bills. The most common cause of medical debt, according to the study, was an unexpected refusal by insurance companies to pay for a medical procedure. As it turns out, medical bankruptcy is almost unheard of outside the United States. Other developed countries except China have single-payer healthcare systems where medical costs are financed by taxes, not by premium finance insurance. In these countries, there are no out-of-pocket costs for medical care and thus no bankruptcy caused by medical debts. In countries... Oh, what the... Okay. Sorry. In these countries, there are no out-of-pocket costs for medical care, thus no bankruptcy caused by medical debts. In countries without single-payer systems beside the United States, there's generally no requirement that medical procedures be provided without payment, and thus procedures are paid for prior for treatment being rendered. So yeah, so 61% of people who... 62% of bankruptcies in the United States were medical bankruptcies. So him saying that compared to we're a great country, I don't know about that, buddy. There is data that shows that 62% of people of bankruptcies in America are medical bankruptcies, which is really bad. Your healthcare system is completely broken. So I don't think that's a fair statement to say that America, compared to, is excellent and amazing.
In fact, it's the greatest success story in world history.
Greatest success story in world history. That's a joke. I don't think it is the greatest success story. Like I just pointed out, medical bankruptcy, 62%. And the Kaiser Foundation is a well-known group that does these studies, so very credible source. They're all clapping. I love it.
So there are parts of that I agree with, some parts that I disagree with. For the most part, I just want to note that the idea of America is an incredible idea. I think that the country has failed to live up to its ideals. I think that there are certain things that are transpiring as we speak that go unchecked. You know, we are supposed to have a system of checks and balances, but I think more often than not, we see a system that is in fact rigged in favor of the powerful. I'll give you specific examples. You know, in the beginning of the pandemic, there were lawmakers in the Senate who engaged in this minimalizing, just completely minimizing the severity of the pandemic, to the point where I actually didn't think that COVID was a serious threat to me, my health, my family's health. In fact, in February, I went on a cruise with my in-laws and had a great time and didn't think that COVID was going to be an issue. Then I find out, of course, a month later, everything starts shutting down, people I know get incredibly sick. And then news reports come out in regard to members of the Senate who had a classified briefing, closed-door briefing on the severity of COVID, and immediately turned around and started selling their stocks. They started buying tech stocks, realizing that people are likely to work home, so they might need to invest in technology or companies that offer technologies that make that possible. Basically, there's insider trading happening within the Senate. And I'm saying it out loud, and I'm saying it on a regular basis because that kind of activity, that type of behavior, first of all, is illegal for the average American, should not be illegal for members of the Senate. The fact that we have...
Absolutely.
The fact that we have lawmakers who are personally invested in businesses that they're deciding legislation on is unacceptable. So when you talk about the lack of trust in our institutions, I understand that lack of trust. And that lack of trust has led to the situation that we're experiencing today with COVID, where people don't believe in what the CDC is telling them, where people question what journalists are reporting about. They just assume, because of the lies that have been told, because of the system being rigged against them, they just assume that they're being lied to. And now we find ourselves in this difficult position where we're trying to find solutions. We're trying to come together so we combat COVID effectively, get people back to work so people can thrive, families can thrive. But that's incredibly difficult to do when people don't trust in our institutions.
So earlier this evening, three of us had some interesting conversations about the way that our culture is broken, the way that civility has broken down. Let me give you a couple of numbers that are actually pretty scary. 15% of Americans have terminated a friendship over political differences. The reality is 53% of the R's have a Democrat friend, only 32% of Democrats have a Republican friend. Granted, a lot of that is reported as being related to former President Trump. Kevin Drum, who I don't know, but is a liberal journalist with Mother Jones, said, quote, "If you hate culture wars, blame liberals." He wrote that in Washington Monthly. Is it fair to blame more liberals for the culture divide, or is it one that both sides have to take blame for?
I think that both sides certainly engage in manufactured culture wars, and it's frustrating to see it. Full disclosure, I myself have engaged in it, and I think instead of being oblivious or delusional about it, it's important to acknowledge when you've made the mistakes, right? And so the demonizing
That's
doesn't help. At the end of the day, we have to realize that we're all Americans. We all want the same thing. Fundamentally, we are the same. We might have different solutions.
I disagree, Anna. I guess this feels like a little bit of a political statement, but I don't believe we're all fundamentally, I mean, I'm not American, but I don't believe all Americans are fundamentally the same. Like, you can't call a Trump supporter and a leftist the exact same, or an independent the exact same. Independents and leftists and centrists, I think, are far closer to each other in terms of fundamentals than a right-winger, far-right guy, a white nationalist, a misogynist. Those people are not the same. Misogynist, hates immigrants. Like, those people are not fundamentally the same. Like, people who are supporting a coup, who want to overturn democracy, are not fundamentally the same as anybody, regardless of beliefs, who supports democracy. For example, Republicans who don't support democracy versus Republicans who do are not even the same, fundamentally the same, in my opinion. They're not. So I think I disagree with that statement. I don't believe that. I get where she's coming from, where she believes we can unite, and she's trying to get that to happen, but I just disagree with that statement. But it's okay.
Different ideas. Demonizing the other side doesn't help to accomplish any solutions. Again, we're seeing that play out in real time as we speak. I think that there's a market for the division, and that market is being exploited by our media. It's being exploited by politicians. And I mean, Facebook is in the news today. I think that Facebook, it makes money based on engagement, and people are engaged in the constant conflict. So it's important to be honest about what the real threats in society are. I think it's important to focus on why it is that certain industries, including the media, engage in this culture of division. And we got to talk about how the incentives are in the wrong place. I mean, there are no incentives to engage in friendly conversation or friendly debate. I hate that my chair keeps, and I'm short, so I'm trying to figure out how to do this.
I don't know.
I hate turning my back to people. Here, I'll just do this. I'll sit on the very edge. But we got to be aware of why it is that people engage in the divisive rhetoric that they engage in. There's a profit motive behind it oftentimes. I see it play out in the media. It's really, really hard not to fall victim to it myself, right? But when I take a step back and I look at where the country is right now, it's shameful. We don't see each other as fellow Americans. We don't see each other as even fellow colleagues or workers in the workplace. Everyone has a political identity, and that's it. And that's not helpful. I think the division in the country is incredibly embarrassing, especially on a world stage. And we got to be more cognizant of that as we engage in political discussions.
I certainly agree with an enormous amount of what Anna is saying about the nature of sort of the world that we live in, where people feel as though they are going to be ostracized socially. They feel that they might be fired, depending on their political point of view. They feel as though if they make comments openly, and this is true for pretty much everybody across the political aisle, actually, with the exception of people who consider themselves on the far left, according to a Cato study, basically every political subgroup in the United States feels uncomfortable speaking openly about what they believe, except if you're on the far left, because then you get to find people's old tweets and do that sort of stuff. But the
yeah.
The, you know, I'm not going to pretend that I think.
I mean, I don't know. I don't know how I feel about that far left. I mean, you have people getting censored on Twitter who jump right back. Like Steven Crowder's been censored multiple times and he's still okay. Like he's still making a hell of a lot of money. He's still getting millions of views. He still has around 5 million subscribers. So no, I don't think that censoring really works on like conservatives or right wingers. Like, you know, you've had YouTubers who've got censored and have jumped back. For example, I'll use a non-political example, like Logan Paul when he did that thing in Japan, which was horrible. He got hammered, but he made a comeback, right? So people can do terrible things. They can even have their social media accounts like disabled for a bit, but they'll come back. I think there's only very extreme people like Donald Trump who are not able to get their Twitter back. And even now, I think he's petitioning for it. So I don't know. I mean, and the right wing censors way more than the left wing. So that's true. Like, they always want to censor. They, like, for example, they're the ones who took away abortion rights for women in Texas. They're the same people who are trying to do these voter ID laws so they can, like, prevent certain people from voting, certain groups like minority groups and, you know, disabled people. Basically making voting as hard as possible, and especially for those groups, so that they're less likely to vote. So I don't know, like, far left is not they might get your social media account banned, which is not good. I don't agree with that. But the far right, they will absolutely take away your rights and your freedoms. That's a big difference, my friend.
I think that the culture wars are irrelevant. I don't. I think that many of the culture wars are highly relevant, and not just relevant, I think that they may be indicative of sort of where the country is going. Because the way that most people experience interactions with the government, particularly the federal government or with politics generally, is not always based on tax rates or the very minute internecine debates that we have over $3.5 trillion bills that nobody knows what's in and then everybody just votes before they read the thing. A lot of the way that people engage in politics, I'm sure we'll get into it, but I think that a lot of the ways that
that's a BS statement. We all know what's in it. You just don't like it, Ben. But we'll get to that later. I'm not going to take it.
Socially, there's been a pretty strong push from the left over the course of the last 10 years in particular, and it's driven a lot of reactionary resentment on the part of people who are on the right. And I would suggest that a lot of the support for President Trump, for example, was driven by precisely that. It wasn't just about his economic program, which differed from sort of the traditional laissez-faire Republican economic program. A lot of it was about the idea that he was a culture warrior who was going to punish enemies and all of this. And so to pretend that the culture war either doesn't exist or that people are making it up in their imagination or that they are overestimating the impact of it on their life is to ignore how people are being treated in the spaces that they treat with every day, on Facebook, on Twitter, in the workplace. I mean, one of the reasons that my family and I left California is not just because of the living standard, although Florida is way better. It is also because, you know, we left a place where we felt as though our children were going to be socially ostracized for a place where we feel our children are not going to be socially ostracized, and that's a big thing.
Yeah.
That's so telling that he thinks that in an amazing, what do you call it, state in America like California, which is like 80, what is it, ridiculous percentage of Democrats. They go to a state like Florida, which has banning teaching like, you know, about MLK, saying you can't reference the Ku Klux Klan. You know what I'm saying? Aren't they also the ones who banned talking about the women's suffrage movement in school? That's where you feel like your kids won't be socially ostracized. They'll fit right in with that. But in places like California where it's taught, now that's a problem. That's very telling about Ben Shapiro's beliefs, my friend. Even if you have never watched him, that right there should be able to tell you what he really believes, which I think is a... If you think Florida is more hospitable and nicer than California, man, something wrong with you. Period.
Yeah. No, I mean, you actually brought up a few issues that I agree with. Number one issue is the constant policing of people's pasts, what they've said in the past. I think holding people to the current standards based on the current culture. You know, if you're looking at tweets, for instance, from 2009, and you're judging that tweet based on what the current culture or the current standards are, it's a little ridiculous, right? So going around demonizing people based on their past statements, it shuts down a conversation that could be had, right? A conversation about, oh, hey, look, society has actually progressed on this, and look at what was okay. I mean, you have late night hosts who were in blackface not too long ago, right? But the culture has changed. I think that society as a whole,
Jimmy
not
Fallon?
everyone, but society as a whole has realized, oh well, blackface has a pretty terrible history, and maybe it's not a good idea to dress like that as like a cute little Halloween costume. But beside the point, I don't think that the culture wars are fake. I think the culture wars are taking place. The point that I'm trying to make is that oftentimes, whatever the culture war is of that moment, it is manufactured as a distraction. A perfect example will be, critical race theory, which is not taught in elementary schools. Critical race theory is a graduate level curriculum. And the fact that it's turned into some weird, like, oh, we need to ban critical race theory in elementary schools, it's ridiculous and a massive distraction that I think is intentionally meant to be a distraction from what people are really feeling frustrated about. The precariousness of their lives, of their work lives, the fact that people feel overworked, that they have no control over the work that they're doing, that they feel alienated over the work that they're doing. These are very real issues, and I think that the fact that it's really largely been ignored by both the press and the very political leaders who were elected to represent them in the first place has led to the anger that we're seeing bubbling up both on the left and the right.
Ben, I think you wanted to make up.
I mean, I agree with that, but I think it's that whole critical race theory was mostly done by the right wing. They're the ones who created that outrage. They're the ones who hyped it up, and they used critical race theory as an excuse to start banning other things that had nothing to do with CRT. Like MLK, like talking about the civil rights movement, banning MLK quotes, if I remember correctly, banning references to Ku Klux Klan, banning references to women's suffrage movement, banning any statements saying that America was founded on racism, limiting those topics on MLK, Malcolm X, basically censoring history while using CRT as an excuse. And none of those guys, I saw it on a Vice thing, or was it Vice or Vox? I can't remember. I think it was Vice or Vox, where they interviewed these people, the people who were banning it. I don't know what you call them in America, judges. They couldn't even describe what was in CRT. So it showed you that their agenda was actually evil and was insidious. And it was mostly done by the right wing. They're the ones who created it, So yeah, I think that's a good point, but I wouldn't say it's left and right, mostly the right wing.
Yeah, I mean, this will be a very quick note. I mean, I obviously disagree with you about critical race theory and whether it is taught in the public schools. Critical race theory, which I studied in law school, it started off as a legal theory, but it has an element of praxis that was meant to be implemented, which is why it is taught in education schools as well, and why
in elementary schools.
Yes, a very boiled down. I mean, Ibram X. Kendi is preaching a very boiled down version of critical race theory, and his book is assigned in elementary schools. I mean, the fact is that when you are having elementary school students who are having to check off boxes with regard to their race and then explain to each other whether they are historically privileged or not in 4th or 5th grade, that's a very dumbed down version of critical race theory. There's sort of a game that gets played with regard to legal theories that end up being boiled down. Intersectionality is another great example of this. Kimberly Crenshaw writes a very intelligent law review article about intersectionality and how you can be a member of more than one minority group and be discriminated against in a variety of ways. And then that is used as the basis for a much broader move in American political life. And then as soon as you point that out, they say, well, that's not intersectionality, it's the original law review article. That's a bit of no true Scotsman games playing. And so I object to that. And look, it is a relevant issue when you have Terry McAuliffe, who's running for governor of Virginia, literally saying in open debate that it should not be parents who are making the educational decisions for their children. It should be the people in education. I mean, that is a culture war issue that I think is of key importance to.
Parents shouldn't be doing that. They shouldn't be deciding what their kids can and can't learn. Like, that's a horrible idea. It should be the education. We should all have a standardized education system. And obviously, we're not saying parents have no say in their children's education. They can have their opinion. But they don't have the ultimate deciding. Because if we leave it up to parents, we'll keep seeing more idiotic anti-vaxxers, white nationalists, misogynists, and all the other crazy groups of people that we have in North America, but more concentrated in America. We'll have all these kind of insane far-right ideologies. And more tax breaks to the rich, that big business is good business, like things like that. That will happen because their parents will brainwash their children. Like, we're assuming that parents are like geniuses who are 100% right all the time, and have this complete understanding of the world and of education and what should be taught. No, bro. Parents can be easily wrong. They can teach their kids the wrong thing, which is why we need to have standardized education, right? It's very, very important. So we can't have people like Ben Shapiro, like misleading people and brainwashing them with his bullshit ideas, right? His kids. That's why he moved, because he realized that he wouldn't be able to control his kids if they were in California. In Florida, a lot more stupidity there, so he can control them better. So yeah, that's stupid. Parents should not have that much of an impact on education. There were parents who were against sex ed in school. You think they were right? Ben probably does, but I don't. Most reasonable people don't. You think there were parents who were against, let's say, teaching about LGBTQ people in school. You think they should have been listened to? Hell no. Right? We can't have stupid people teaching stupid things. Education is very important, and it has to be standardized, and it cannot be completely handled by parents. Their opinions matter, of course, we listen to them, but they don't get the final decision of what their kids can't learn. It should be up to the school system.
To people who have kids, right?
Well, see, I think that that's part of what leads to the lack of trust in our institutions. Yes, as a parent, you get to make decisions about which school you want your kid to go to. If you're uncomfortable with the public school curriculum, you can take a look at private school options. If you don't want that, you can homeschool. But who gets to be if we're talking about parents making those decisions, who gets to be the arbiter of which parent gets to be the arbiter of what gets taught in any particular public school? I'm not really buying that they're learning about critical race theory or even a boiled down. I'm positive that elementary schools are not learning about systemic racism, and even if they are, even if it's a boiled down version of that, learning about systemic racism is important. I think that that's something that's an issue in this country that
exactly,
gets
Anna.
ignored or completely denied, and I think that's wrong. I think that's what also leads to the division that we're experiencing.
Well, that's going to be the major cultural war issue, right? Because the fact is that I, as a parent, believe that if you're going to teach...
You think there's no systemic racism?
I believe that it depends on how you define systemic racism. So if you're talking about legal...
Oh, he's doing a Jordan Peterson, by the way, where they get confronted on something and they're like, well, it depends on what you mean by that. It depends on what you mean by what and by and that. That's what Jordan would say.
Regimens of racism, no. If you're talking about history has after effects, of course. So I think there's a real problem with semantic overload in a lot of our political conversations. And when people say systemic racism, sometimes what they mean by systemic racism is history has consequences. You can't have 150 years of, 300 years of slavery followed by Jim Crow and that not have after effects, which of course is true. And sometimes what they mean is that every inequality in American public life is due to some systemic inequity that is currently taking place in the United States, which I think is absolutely 100% false.
BS, Ben. Those are not the two extremes. One, I do believe that Jim Crow and slavery have had a lot of negative effects on the black community, and of course residential schools have had horrible effects on the indigenous community and so on and so on, and racism against Asians and the things that Asians went through in America also had effects on the Asian community, of course different degrees to these things, but it's not just two things. It's not like you can just believe that, and then if you in the other part, the other definition of systemic racism is you believe that every single inequality in that exists in America is because of systemic racism. No, it's more nuanced. It's like I do believe that Jim Crow, slavery have negative effects even after they've been fixed. But that doesn't mean that I also believe that every systemic thing, every inequality is because of systemic racism. No, nobody believes that. We believe that a lot of the inequalities are because of systemic racism. We're not saying every single thing a negative thing that happens to a minority is because of systemic racism. Nobody except a few fringe fools believe that. So that's not a good argument, Ben, at all. I don't believe that's a good argument at all. It's not good.
We certainly see that playing out in our criminal justice system. Are you going to deny that, or are you going to say that, let's say, African Americans or Latinos are just inherently more criminal?
I'm not going to say either of those things. I'm going to say that.
So why are they overrepresented in our prisons? Especially when you consider.
This may be beyond the scope of our conversation, but the answer is because not all groups commit crimes at the same level. That has nothing to do with genetics.
That's literally the argument that she said that you were going to make, and she said, they're more criminal by nature, and you just said, well, not all groups commit crimes at the same rate.
That has
Right.
everything to do
So-
with circumstances.
You guys hold those thoughts on
Culture.
education, because I do want to get back to some of that too, but
Sure.
let me move on to something else we talked about. We talked about the trust issue, and there's some very interesting surveys out there on trust. Gallup did a survey. There's a drop across the board in trust in all institutions except law enforcement, which is very interesting. Congress, sorry for my friends there, is the lowest. Media is down there almost as low as Congress. Those that rank the highest were small business and the military. So this low media rank, is that fair, or is that being manufactured as part of a culture war?
Oh, it's fair. I mean, it's entirely fair. I mean, I think that one of the things that we've seen for both good and bad, the fragmentation of media is a result of systemic distrust in the media, and that's existed for a very long time, and that's nothing new. And I think that it's completely fair for people to look at the media. I know there are people on the left who think that the media is too right-wing, right? Obviously, we on the right think that the media is far too left-wing. But I think that sort of distrust in media sources is very often justified. I think that we're requiring more of people than we used to in the past, because once people have realized that there's an inherently political angle to how people cover the news, now we're asking them, if you want a full rounded diet, you actually have to choose it yourself, right? You have to cultivate yourself to watch the Young Turks and then watch my show and decide who you agree with, and where there's sort of a common locus of fact, that's the fact and everything else is the opinion. That's asking a lot of viewers, where we didn't used to ask very much of viewers at all, right? You just turn on the evening news and buy whatever Walter Cronkite is saying, whether it's true or not. I think most Americans waking up to that is a good thing. The systemic lack of trust in media has some bad downstream effects sometimes, because when there are no gatekeepers, there are no gatekeepers. So I like the fact that there are no gatekeepers, because I think the gatekeepers were very often biased, but without gatekeepers, sometimes bad stuff gets through.
Yeah, I mean, I think that right now we're experiencing people existing in various filter bubbles. So if you are, for instance, consuming most of your news online, if you like a particular brand of programming, if you, let's say, lean more conservative and you're watching mostly conservative news, algorithms offer up more and more conservative news. And so when you get if you have preconceived notions and all of a sudden you're hearing or reading something that challenges those preconceived notions, you're gonna have a negative reaction to it. And you see that playing out across the board. I'll give you an example. I mean, I have family members who are constantly consuming news online. My mom's a good example, right? You'd be surprised she's my mom, because she's on Facebook, she clicked on a link to, let's say, the Daily Wire, perfect example. Well, Facebook is gonna be offering up more Daily Wire type content, and then all of a sudden when she's watching the Young Turks, she'll be like, well, you know, I read on Facebook, or I read on the Daily Wire, whatever, that X, Y, and Z happened, and you're wrong, right? That conversation doesn't actually happen that often. But I'm giving you an example.
I was hopeful there for a second.
Right? And so look, there are all sorts of issues with the media, right? I mean, the media for the longest time completely ignored the very real frustrations that workers have been feeling in this country. I mean, the Federal Reserve released data indicating that nearly half of Americans can't even afford a $400 emergency. At the same time, you tune into CNN, CNBC, MSNBC, I mean, it doesn't matter, across the board, and they're like, the economy is doing great. You know, we're seeing record growth, and what they're specifically talking about is the stock market. But the stock market is disconnected from the reality that the majority of workers are experiencing. So I think that that type of stuff leads to people feeling, you know, distrustful toward the press. At the same time, they exist in these filter bubbles and have their preconceived notions. It's hard to challenge that. So there's a lot of different things happening at the same time. I don't blame people for not being so trusting of the media. One other thing that I'll note is that the incentives are always in the wrong place. The kind of stories that I want to talk about on the Young Turks and do talk about on the Young Turks get no attention. They don't do well in terms of the number of views. I want to talk about international news. I want to talk about what's happening in Brazil. I want to talk about what's happening in Ecuador. It'll get like maybe 40,000 views at most. You know what gets a lot of views? I don't know, Ana Kasparian destroys this person, or here's the latest cat fight. Like, I hate it. It's garbage. It's garbage. Because it leads to people not trusting the press, but at the same time, the profits are there. the money is there. And I think you see that play out across the board, whether you're talking about cable news or online media.
Really well spoken there, because we've seen this with Facebook. Facebook literally just had a leak. We're going to cover that after this. Facebook whistleblower basically said that Facebook literally advocates for hateful content because it gets more engagement, because that's how they make their money. So the algorithm will push for hateful content. Same way I think maybe on YouTube they'll push the algorithm for, I don't know, content that's more hateful or divisive, or maybe like clickbaity, or things like that with negativity. But they won't push the content that should be pushed, because see, everything's about profit, and profit's not always great for society. Only those who are profiting, right? So yeah, that's a very good point by Ana Kasparian. She's doing amazing in this debate, by the way. She's freaking killing it.
And at the dinner table, we're having an interesting conversation. It's clearly a generational thing. My generation grew up watching Walter Cronkite and Huntley and Brinkley and all these folks. And one of the things that I saw in your bio was that you got interested in this field because of Barbara Walters. So what happens now to the Barbara Walters? I mean, where does news reporting go? Will the nightly news be a thing of the past? And are we simply going to continue to retreat to those mediums that demonstrate that we know everything already? Where's this going to go now?
Well, let me just note, I loved Barbara Walters on ABC's 2020. So I remember as a kid, like getting super excited after TGIF was over because ABC's 2020 would be on. And I was like fascinated by the fact that this woman was getting paid to talk to these incredibly interesting people from around the world. And I was just fascinated by the conversations. That's how I got interested in journalism.
I don't know
and
about
media.
Barbara.
But I just feel like the type of conversations that she had, or just news about world events, they don't seem to attract the kind of attention that they used to. And it might be because of an oversaturated market. It might be because conflict tends to sell. Manufactured conflicts tend to sell.
For sure.
But I wish we can get back to a place where journalism still really existed, where there was like ethical standards that were, that reporters abided by, anchors abided by. I wish there was a clear distinction between opinion and actual hard news journalism. This is what I talk about with my journalism students whenever I have the time to teach. I always tell them, I'm like, look, there's a difference between what I do, which is analysis, opinion, and what you should be doing as an investigative journalist, for instance. Going out there and actually gathering the news, talking to both sides, not equating both sides and acting as if you're completely neutral, but making sure that you gather the facts on the ground and report them as they are. It's really hard to find that these days. There's still great journalism taking place. I wouldn't be able to do my analysis or my job without that great journalism taking place. But these are the people who are oftentimes not paid well, ignored, and don't get any of the benefits that someone might in the media if you engage in the conflict nonsense.
Can we go back, Ben, and separate the fact-based from the opinion now, or is it going to be conflated for the foreseeable future?
I mean, I think the truth is that was a relatively modern construct. I mean, if you go back to the foundations of the Republic, the people who were reporting were also doing opinion, and that was true all the way through the beginning of the 20th century. It was really only with Walter Lippmann in the 1920s that you start talking about objective standards in journalism. And there's a difference between an objective standard that you apply to how a story is reported and being an objective reporter, meaning you have no politics at all. And I think, frankly, if you want to reinstall some sort of institutional trust, it would be good for reporters to say, here's who I voted for, and then here are also the facts that I am reporting on, because otherwise it ends up being a gotcha, right? I see how you're reporting that. I see what you're doing. I know what you really think about this story. So that's a major issue. I think the other big issue, obviously, I mentioned gatekeepers before. I'm very wary of the reinstallation of institutional gatekeepers, because if you want to talk about market incentives, the big players have all the incentives to ensure that they are the ones who maintain their access via the gates. And this is one of my great fears with some sites that we've been very successful with, like Facebook, is that reestablishing the idea that there are quote-unquote trusted news sources, and those all coincidentally are legacy media sources, means that everybody who's not a legacy media source, somebody who started up a company in the last 10 years, right, we opened our doors in 2015, we're not legacy media. And so we don't have that legacy. So now you're shutting out all the players who are actually entering the market.
Oh, I actually agree with Ben here. It is very true that Facebook can be very dangerous with all that. They basically are the gatekeepers. They decide what's on there, like what's news and what isn't news, because they're so massive, right? Such a huge outreach. And funny enough, all their trusted sources are legacy media, like mainstream media, and none of the new media like these people. So, yeah, that's definitely concerning. Good point, Ben. I know I can't believe I'm saying it, but good point.
So you actually mentioned, again, just a little bit of a shift because you got my attention earlier. You're both born and raised in California. You left, you stayed, but we had an interesting conversation at the dinner table that maybe your perspectives on California aren't all that different. Ben, I know you said you were afraid your kids were going to have a difficult time because of their political views. So are you sad that you left California? Or tell us?
I have not thought for one day about that decision. That was it was one of the best decisions that I have ever made for my family. We are overjoyed. Florida is a wonderful state. Basically, because of my Orthodox Jewish faith, that means that I had to move to a place that had some significant Jewish resources. And so I was looking for a place that had those resources, was in a red state, preferably with 0% state income tax. And that narrowed it down to basically Dallas and Florida. And so we ended up in Florida. It's wonderful. But I mean, it wasn't just that. It was really a lifestyle thing, because my wife for years was saying, yeah, we're paying higher taxes, but you make a lot of money. So, that's fine. But the problem is you don't get any of the public services back in California. So in our area, which was a fairly decent suburb, you had just an inundation of homelessness in the area. Like, my kids could not walk around the neighborhood. We'd open up our front gate. There'd be a person shooting heroin in their foot literally in front of our house, or a person passed out on the street. We had our business on Ventura Boulevard. We had to board up windows during the George Floyd, some protests, some riots.
Some protests, some riots. Mostly protests, some riots, my boy. Yeah. And of course, if there's such a homeless problem, why don't you want to solve that problem? Oh, but because your backers, they would stop paying you. Yeah. They would stop paying you, wouldn't they, Ben? If you actually wanted to solve homelessness.
We had, there was a homeless person who smashed.
Like supporting the party that would help homelessness, which is the left. If you really had such a big problem with it. But you won't do that, would you? Republicans don't care. They just say, move them out. Move them out. Right? Move them away. They don't even look at them as humans. So I don't know. It seems a bit weird.
The front plate glass window of our establishment. When we left and we moved our main business to Nashville, then my family and a small core of the business moved to Florida. When we left, we thought that we were going to lose probably half the people working for us. Instead, I think over 90% of the people were like, you're going, get us out of here. Everybody wanted out. There's a reason people are leaving California.
Well, Ana, you shared some concerns too, and California, like Pennsylvania, lost another congressional seat. So their population is not growing, certainly not at the same rate as Texas, Florida, et cetera. So share some of your concerns, because you talked a little bit about it before.
Sure. So California is poorly governed right now. I was pretty blunt and transparent about the fact that I signed the petition to recall Gavin Newsom. So
I signed it too. We were on exactly the same page before I left.
Right. Now, unfortunately, the individuals running against him were worse than he was or is. And so, unfortunately, when the ballot showed up to my
Gavin Newsom, there's a serious homelessness crisis in California. I do not doubt that. Right, I've read about it. It's crazy. And Gavin Newsom's not a great governor. He's your typical centrist, corrupt Democrat. So yeah, I think. But the thing is, Larry Elder was so much worse. So they had to vote Gavin in.
Box, I ended up voting against the recall, but I was hoping that there would be a better candidate to challenge him. I didn't like any of the candidates. Now, the reason why I've decided to stay in California is because I love the state. I know what the state is capable of, and I would much rather stay and fight to make the state better in any capacity that I have. But with that said, the issues in California are endless. You have corruption. Literally a city council member had his office raided by the FBI because of the pay-for-play scheme that he was engaged in. You have real estate developers running amok. You have this effort to build public housing to alleviate some of the homelessness, but at the same time, you have the lawmakers in the state giving these sweetheart deals to developers who are very clearly inflating their prices and taking forever to build said public housing. So there's all sorts of mismanagement. I disagree with the way that they're handling the homelessness issue as well, although I think my solutions might be a little different. I think that this idea of being incredibly laxed with camping has been pretty disastrous and has attracted, homelessness isn't just a California issue, it's an issue throughout the country. But when other states are pretty strict against encampments and California is very lax, what do you think that's going to do? It's going to attract homelessness in the state as well. I want to provide housing for everyone. I consider it a human right. But I think the way that the state is doing it through a public-private partnership has not worked out at all.
Thank you. So let's move on to another public policy issue, one that's being debated in Washington right now. Tax the rich is a very popular sentiment. It's also now a fashion statement, I guess, which we've all seen. So when President Biden looks into the microphone and says, "Pay your fair share," what does that mean?
It means that if you're one of the 55 corporations that literally paid absolutely nothing in federal income taxes in 2020, and in fact received $3.5 billion in tax refunds or rebates, or tax refunds, I should say, maybe you should pay your fair share. But here's the thing, if the tax code is written in a way where corporations can legally take advantage of loopholes and incredibly low effective corporate tax rates, they're gonna do it, right? So it's one thing to say pay your fair share, it's another thing to actually write a tax code that is a little more equitable and ensures that everyone is in fact paying their fair share.
Ben, what's pay your fair share mean?
I mean, the obvious answer would be a flat tax, but the longer answer is that the United States has one of the most progressive income tax systems on planet Earth. Most of the systems in, for example, Northern Europe are far less progressive. The top tax rate kicks in a lot lower on the income scale because you have to pay for the large-scale social services. The people who are at the top of the income bracket in the United States, the top quintile, essentially pays all net taxes in the United States. Not some, not most, all. And the reason for that is because there are tax transfers, and the transfer of payments that are inherent in public services do not accrue to the people at the top of the tax bracket. They accrue to everybody else who's receiving that sort of funding. When we talk about higher taxes on corporations, we do not have one of the world's lowest corporate tax rates. We are somewhere in the middle. In looking at the OECD countries, we are certainly not the lowest on the totem pole in terms of our corporate tax rate. In fact, right-wing sources like the Heritage Foundation will say that it is much friendlier to do business in places like Denmark or Sweden in many cases than it is to do business in the United States.
Tax rate's pretty high in Denmark and Sweden.
Yeah, I mean, they're very high in Denmark and Sweden. What is he talking about? Like, this is, I don't know, what is he lying? I'm saying that the effective tax rate in Denmark is much higher than the US, and Sweden doesn't have a very high corporate tax rate, but income tax rate is much higher. So they still have a better income tax rate than I think the US does. So yeah, Denmark, Sweden can't really equate the two. They're both very different in the way they handle it. But people there love living there, and the social services are amazing. So yeah, paying a high tax rate is fine. Some people don't like it, obviously, and I think that article was a little biased because they wanted to make it seem like the taxation's bad, and it seems like only that rich banker guy in the article was complaining, right? I'm pretty sure if you ask the average Swede, they wouldn't really care. And they're saying, oh, it decentralizes studying and working hard and making a meritocracy if you have a high income tax rate, which is complete BS, right? It doesn't. It just means you have access to amazing social stuff, social security stuff. But again, Denmark and Sweden are they're not the same like that.
The personal income tax rate is very high in Denmark and Sweden. The corporate tax rate is basically near or on par with that of the United States. If we were to raise our corporate tax rate the way that President Biden is talking about, we'd actually have a higher corporate tax rate than China currently does. The notion that corporations ought to be paying tax at all, in my view, is mistaken, given the fact that the income is immediately either reinvested in the company or passed on to people who immediately pay all of that tax. By the time you actually receive your income in this country, the income's been taxed about 7 different ways. Right? You're getting taxed through the corporation, then it's passed on to you as salary, which is taxed. If you invest it in the stock market and then you sell your stock, that is taxed as capital gains tax. When you die, the government taxes that as well. So how many times can you tax the same dollar before people begin to disinvest?
I'd like to respond to that, though.
Okay, go ahead. Okay,
Yeah.
go ahead.
To argue that the corporate tax rates in the United States are too high, or that, I mean, first off, let me just touch on the comparison you gave regarding progressive taxes in European countries versus the United States. I mean, yes, the taxes might be higher in those European countries, but what do people living in those countries get in return? They get incredible childcare. I mean, listen, the average American family, two-income household, spends a whopping 22% of their household income on childcare alone, right? So when you're talking about European countries that offer quality childcare, that, by the way, that opens up the opportunity for people to go to work, something that we should maybe think about as we're dealing with this labor shortage. 64,000 women left the job force in April alone. Not because they want to, but because they can't afford childcare. Everything in this country is privatized. Everything has a for-profit model. And there's consequences that come along with that, including for the business community that might want, a more robust social safety net program, social safety net to ensure that people feel comfortable enough to go to work. But we don't have that here. So yes, people might pay more in taxes, including those lower on the income scale, but what they get in return is far greater than what people in this country have been getting.
The United States has spent, since the beginning of the war on poverty, some $22 trillion in the war on poverty. We spend an awful lot on social services in this country on a per capita level. In fact, it is very much on par with what the European countries spend.
Yeah, but the efficiency is terrible, and the way those programs are constructed are horrible, unlike those countries in the European countries that we talked about, like Denmark and Sweden. So that's not a great argument.
It's just not spent particularly well. When it comes to things like childcare, a very young Elizabeth Warren, before she became Senator Elizabeth Warren, specifically wrote about universal childcare, and she said that it actually was contributing to what she called the two-income trap in a book that she wrote in the early 2000s. And what she talked about is the fact that there are a lot of women who, for example, may not want to work, and what you're actually doing is incentivizing people to have to go to work because you are now providing childcare, as opposed to providing a competitive advantage to, for example, families where one parent is working. I agree with you, by the way, that...
So are you making the argument that one parent should work, competitive advantage to the... I don't understand what he was trying to say there.
Childcare is a very difficult issue. I also agree that this is why we used to have, for example, family structures that were conducive to allowing people to help out. There are many businesses that do provide for some form of childcare. We certainly have many businesses that provide for some form of maternity or paternity leave. The European countries, which obviously have been used as a model by a lot of folks on the left, between 1970 and 1993, they experienced exorbitantly low rates of growth. And the reason for that was because they radically overburdened their social safety net systems. It created enormous social problems. It created enormous immigration problems. They had to scale a lot of those back. And
why would it create immigration problems?
It created immigration problems because a lot of people were coming specifically for the benefits.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, yes, that would be my point, which is it creates more problems.
Exactly. You just oh my god, a self-owned dude, literally self-owned. It created an immigration problem. Why? Because a lot of people came for the benefits. Yeah, that means the country's doing the right job, buddy. That means a lot of people want to go to Sweden and Denmark and other European countries that have great benefits because it's a great country to live in. They're doing their job, Ben. You just self-owned. Oh my god. Bruh. That's funny.
Problems very often than it's
sure, I guess that's a...
Yes, if I put a free donut sign in my shop, people will come for this.
No, but if you have a society that actually takes care of its workers, right? If you have a society that makes your life a lot easier, people are going to want to immigrate. It's part of the reason why people wanted to come here. People are going to want to live in countries that have both economic opportunity, but also social safety net programs that, again, just make your... I mean, we talk about freedom. If you look at the World Freedom Index, okay, we like to think of the United States as the freest country. We're not the freest country. You look at that list, we're like pretty low down compared to a lot of these Nordic countries. Denmark is top of that list. So look, Denmark has a mixed economy. When we have these debates about, ooh, socialism versus capitalism, I think that those debates are a little ridiculous because every country is well, not every country, but most countries are mixed economies.
Right, the United States
right?
is mixed economy.
Mixed,
Sure.
exactly.
Yep.
Now, the issue with the United States is there used to be a time when public universities were free, right? You didn't have to dig yourself into a massive hole to get an education. There was a time in this country where there was universal child care. That was cut down to the point where it's like no longer in existence unless you're desperate and have like no money and need to take advantage of some programs that are available in some states. But my point is, like, we have an issue here where on one hand, you know, we're experiencing a labor shortage. We want people to go back to work. On the other hand, people literally can't afford the childcare necessary in order to put their kids in a daycare, put their kids in childcare, and be able to go to work without their entire paycheck.
The Biden bill removes many work requirements for many of the payments that are being made to people, and it's incentivizing people not to go back to work, which is why we have 10 million open jobs in the United States and people not coming back to work.
That is not what that bill does. In fact, that's not what that bill.
Let me
Are you
move
talking
on.
about the $3.5 trillion reconciliation
I'm talking about the
bill?
$3.5 trillion
The
bill.
$3.5 trillion
The earned
reconciliation
income
bill
tax credit
offers
removed.
universal pre-K,
Yeah.
which opens up the opportunity for mothers to go to work if they want to go to work. The $3.5 trillion bill, by the way, has all sorts of subsidies for corporations, which I don't really understand why the business community isn't salivating over that, because rather than just going full force with public programs, which I think would be the right way to go, it's offering all sorts of subsidies in these, you know, public-private partnerships. Now, the physical infrastructure bill has a lot more corporate giveaways, which is why the, you know, business community absolutely loves it, offers the chance to privatize public infrastructure, which is why the business community absolutely loves it. But at the end of the day, if we don't create a society where Americans can actually have families and go to work, then we're going to be in a lot of trouble.
So to go back to your immigration point, you made a mention a moment ago of
I love how Ben completely avoided the point that she just made because he realized, oh my god, I look like an idiot. Like the point that the fact that she called him out for basically lying on the infrastructure bill. Sorry, the reconciliation bill. I think he was talking about. Completely lied on that, and now he's pivoting because he's like, oh shit, I just got caught out. Damn, she knows her stuff. Right? Yep. This is not your show, Ben, where you can just lie with no pushback. This is an open debate, so you're gonna be called out on your BS. This is why conservatives in general don't want to debate leftists. So look how he quickly pivoted, and this crowd is clearly pro Ben because they clap way more for him than her, for Anna. So yeah, she's doing amazing.
immigrating to the country for the benefits. That's just
Right.
abjectly untrue. The fact is that the United States' great immigration growth throughout the beginning of the Republic, all the way up through about 1930, was entirely driven by people who were leaving places that in many cases had broader benefits, places like Germany, to come to the United States where there was no social safety net. The fact is that the vast majority of people who used to leave and come to the United States were coming specifically to build a life knowing that they really didn't have a lot of social safety net. Now, that's not an argument that this
So you're making the argument that people came from that time to the US because they don't want social benefits? That they were running, oh please, stop paying for my childcare, stop paying for my education, stop paying for my healthcare. It's creeping me out, dude. Stop treating me well. I need to go to the US. I need to be treated badly. I need to pull myself up by my non-existent bootstraps and get going, bro. Yeah, let's go. Basically. Okay, I can't wait for Anna's response to this. Because again, I don't have much understanding of US immigration from back then, so I'm not going to say anything. I don't want to talk about things that I don't have any understanding of. Let's see what she responds.
There shouldn't be some state and local possibility for a social safety net. But the notion that the way that you build a successful country that is a world power and is capable of not only making sure that its citizens are taken care of, but essentially making sure that the entire Western world is taken care of, which we did throughout the Cold War, the idea that you do that simply by raising the number of social security payments that you're making to people or benefit payments that you're making to people, this is the way that you build that sort of economy, is just non-borne out by empirical
Okay, we've
fact.
had a real far-ranging conversation.
Yes.
Ben, let me ask you another question. Our organization is one.
But I'm going to guess that's a lie because that line of, since she's not going to answer, that line of logic makes no sense. Like, let me research this right now. In late 1800s, many people in the world's part of the world decided to leave their homes and immigrate to the United States. Library of Congress. Freeing crop failure, land and job shortages, rising taxes, and famine. So he said it's because of social services. They just said rising taxes. So rising taxes doesn't necessarily mean that you're having better social services. Those pricks could just be charging them more and giving them nothing. Fleeing crop failure, land and job shortages, and famine. What does this have to do with social safety nets? Many came to the US because it was perceived as the land of the economic opportunity. Others came seeking personal freedom or relief from political or religious persecution. But yeah, he was right. There was a lot of influx, but his reasoning saying that they were running away from social things like social safety nets was ridiculous. They were running away from like famine, crop failure, job shortages, rising taxes. Like, whereas none of these documents ever mention immigration. It's not immigration. None of them mention social safety nets. They were running from social safety nets, which is the point Ben Shapiro was making. It's absolutely ludicrous. So he's right. A lot of immigrants did come from the 1850s to 1915 time period, right? True. But they weren't coming because they were running away from free healthcare and free childcare and free education and free housing. They were running away because of religious persecution, racial persecution, famine, crop failure, rising taxes. And again, rising taxes does not necessarily mean better social services. It could just be rising taxes because the rulers are pricks. Job shortages. It has nothing to do with social safety nets, buddy. So yeah, that's a horrible argument by Ben Shapiro, but I'm not surprised. He is a moron, and he does use what he does is he uses facts, and then he assigns like things like a purpose to them that don't exist, like we just did there. Or he'll mix facts and lies, which makes it very difficult to know if he's telling the truth or not. Like, it sounds good because part of it is true. Yes, a lot of immigration happened, but not for the reasons that he said. We just saw the reasons.
And then on a daily basis supports whatever you want to call it, the free market system of economic choice. It was disturbing to me, and I think to our organization, when the National Education Association looked at a resolution, I believe it passed one of their committees, that called the free market system one of oppression, but didn't call out other totalitarian regimes. So what does it say when our educators don't seem to believe in the free market system?
Well, I mean, obviously, I love this question. So I will say that the National Education Association is a very far left group, and so it's not a particular surprise that they're characterizing freedom of the market in that particular way. It also goes back to the conversation we were having earlier about what sort of control parents should have over the education of their own children. There's a reason I send my kids to private school. The notion that capitalism is a system of unfreedom, while government, largesse, is a system of freedom, ignores the fact that somebody actually has to pay the bills. It also ignores the fact that all growth, not some, all growth that has ever happened is a result of capital.
That's ridiculous. So I guess before capitalism, nothing ever grew. Societies have grown, become progressive, have died, have gone to ashes before capitalism, and will do so after capitalism. So there's been a lot of growth and stuff before capitalism. So that already proves that you don't need capitalism to grow. Now, capitalism might have done it on a scale never seen before. But let's be real, a lot of bad things came around with capitalism too. There's a myth. Let me again prove it to you. Capitalists say that new ideas and innovation come from competition and the search for profits. They claim socialism would end innovation. However, socialists want a system that's far more innovative than capitalism. It's literally called the socialist. But let's see. When capitalists talk about competition, they don't mean healthy rivalries or the constructive competition of ideas in science and art. These things would still exist under socialism. They mean the destructive competition between business for profit. They claim that entrepreneurs, capitalists invest in new areas, other drivers of new ideas because of their constant search for profit. Like, for example, let's look at Musk. Elon Musk doesn't actually create anything. He hires people who create things for him, and he takes most of the money. He's a capitalist. They're the ones innovating. Capitalists, which is the private ownership of the means of production. The private owners, they don't innovate shit. It's the people who they hire are innovating, who have been educated in public schools, brother. There we go. Right? They've been educated in public schools. So let me repeat this. People in capitalism, the capital owners, don't innovate. It is the people they hire who have been educated through a public school system, through the government, that innovate in the first place. These people just give them the structure. Right? They put all the money in the company, and they take most of the money from their labor and pocket it. They're the ones who innovate, the people who they hire, not the people who are doing the hiring, the capital owners. They don't do any innovation. So capitalism doesn't do innovation. It just profits off it. That's what it does. And it helps it by giving them a place to innovate and funding them, which is fair, which is good. But that would still happen under socialism. So capitalism doesn't uniquely do it. In fact, they would do better under socialism because they would be able to have more money under socialism. And we wouldn't have these capital owners basically taking most of the money and pocketing it. So yeah, that's bullshit. This was true in the 17th century when capitalists were facing the stifling feudal system. Under feudalism, rich lords controlled the land and its resources. They strangled economic growth by denying these resources to capitalists who were looking to experiment. Compared to this, capitalism was an innovative and dynamic system. When the feudal lords were removed from power, it unleashed a wave of progress and new ideas. But in today's world, we're not comparing capitalism to feudalism. We're comparing it to socialism, the democratic ownership and planning of the economy by the working class people. The labor of the working class has made the modern world possible. Modern technology is dependent on large-scale infrastructure built by workers. Most of key innovations of the modern world have been made by researchers and workers reacting to the intellectual climate of their time. Whether it's publicly or privately funded, most research and development R&D is done collaboratively by workers for a wage, not by entrepreneur investors. Just like I said, it's not done by Musk's or Bezos. I mean, Bezos is not. I mean, Amazon doesn't invent things, but let's just say Elon Musk's company. They don't do it, right? All the inventing, all the hard labor is done by the workers. These guys just make a lot of money off that, right? And they provide the money, but they barely pay these people, and they make way more money than the people doing the innovating. Why? Because they own the means of production. So no, capitalism doesn't have innovation. It can, but it's not the capital owners doing it, it's the workers. The labor, okay. Most of the key innovations of the modern world have been made by researchers and workers reacting to the intellectual climate of their time. Whether it is publicly or privately funded, most research and development is done collaboratively by workers for a wage, not by entrepreneur inventors, like we said. The most important driver of progress that capitalism has created is the working class. The possibility of a better socialist way of running things exists in the rise of the modern collective workplace. There have been better times when we have gotten a glimpse of what would have been possible if our workplace were run by workers. In 1976, a union delegate at a UK defense contractor, Lucas Aerospace, published a plan to transform their workplace. They spent 2 years holding mass meetings and surveying the capabilities of workforce and machinery. Instead of making weapons of war, Lucas Aerospace workers wanted to build medical and alternative energy technologies. Their ideas ranged from portable life support systems for ambulances to hybrid cars. They discovered that they could build enough kidney dialysis machines to make up for the shortfall that the British health system faced every year. They planned to manufacture a cart that allowed children with spina bifida to move around more easily. The Australia Spina Bifida Association expressed interest in ordering 2,000 of these. The bosses rejected this plan and sacked the union delegates. Some of the workers were genuinely shocked. They thought that if they had good ideas, the ideas would be used. They came up against the fact that capitalism is not based on innovation or democracy. Capitalism, in fact, acts as a barrier, just like the feudal lords did in the 17th century. Yeah, so they don't care. All capitalism cares is about profit. And if innovation happens and they profit off it, they'll be okay with it. But if they can't profit off that innovation and they don't see it as a good one, they'll kill it. In the socialist societies, workers would control their workplaces. People would have real stake in their work because improvements in productivity would mean fewer working hours. Free time and greater access to education would mean far more people could take part in pushing society forward. How much progress have we missed out on because capitalism keeps people living in poverty? Capitalism needs a poorer class, needs people to exploit, otherwise it can't function. Because if you can't exploit anybody, how do you have millions and billions of dollars in the hands of these people? If you can't exploit them, well, how do capital owners own the means of production? How do they keep themselves so rich and powerful they can't be touched? They have to exploit people. A socialist society will be able to invest in research for its own sake, opening up new frontiers. If someone had a good idea for a new product, resources could be freed to follow it up. There would be no incentive for existing industries to fund scientific fraud to avoid becoming obsolete. As we've seen with tobacco and fossil fuel industries, there would be any reason to censor new discoveries such as trade secrets. Yeah. You know, when scientists realized that tobacco and like smoking cigarettes was really, really bad, did the companies embrace this new innovation, say, oh, look, it's pushing society forward, it's helping people? No. They tried to ban it. They tried to censor them. They even had, I saw in a documentary, they even tried to have those guys killed, a few of them, because they were threatening their profits. That's all it is. So don't let Ben Shapiro fool you into thinking that capitalism is for profit. Nah, bruh. I mean, sorry, for innovation. It's for profit. In a truly free society, we would have time, access to education, a stake in our work, and the ability to democratically fund new ideas. Innovation would happen on a level far beyond what is possible with capitalism. Socialism would free up the potential of capitalism, most important, the creation, the working class. We could finally use its potential to solve the world's problems and build a better society. That is what socialists are fighting for. Beautiful. I'm actually going to follow these people. Yeah, I'm going to keep this tab open. I like them. I didn't even know. I just searched for the capitalism thingy, and I got this. Right? So exactly, like capital owners like Elon Musk do not innovate. It is the people that they hire and exploit that do the innovation, and then they take all the credit for it. Elon Musk is not a Tony Stark or a T'Challa, aka Black Panther, another innovator. He's none of those people. He is just some idiotic Redditor who got a lot of power. Basically, not like one of those business nerds who spend their time on Reddit talking about cryptocurrency and go on YouTube comments and all. He's basically that idiot who's had a lot of power and exploits people. Get out of here, dog. Capitalism? No, you don't need capitalism for that. In fact, innovation would be better under socialism because you wouldn't have anyone exploiting anybody. You would have money going for research's sake, not for profit. So, basically. So yeah, capitalism doesn't drive innovation. It's the working people who drive innovation. Capitalism simply profits off it. Right? And yeah, they fund it, but it could be way better under socialism. So no, it's not capitalism, it's the working class. Let's go.
Free market transactions in which people consent to services and goods from other people, in which people innovate and make new products. There's a reason that we're not still riding horses and buggies around, and that is because of innovation. It's because of incentive structures. It's because people get to keep the fruit of their own labor and then use those fruits of their own labor in order to invest in things. The true...
No, it's because of the working class. Not investors. They don't care. They don't innovate anything. They just make money off it.
Growth in the American economy was never just a question of dollars and cents. It was what you got for those dollars and cents. All of that is driven by entrepreneurs who are willing to take risk. And when you disincentivize risk, you end up disincentivizing people from taking those risks. As we become a much more wage-based society, and that has happened for a large segment of the population, that means that you are incentivizing people to not take those risks. And countries that don't have people taking those risks end up being countries that economically stagnate.
That's complete BS. Like I've said, workers are the ones who do it, not investors, not capital owners. They don't invest and take the risk. It's the people who work their butts off who manage to do these things. Right? The working class. They're the ones who innovate. They're the ones who come up with these ideas. Okay, maybe somebody comes up with an idea. Let's say Mark Zuckerberg, for example, comes up with an idea. He didn't come on his own. He had a bunch of friends, people who did it. And who made his idea into reality, though? Just him? No, he hired a bunch of people in Facebook to do it. They helped us make his idea reality. Yet we give more credit to Mark than those guys? That's crazy. You think he didn't do it on his own either, so why does he deserve most of the profits? Under socialism, that wouldn't be it. Everyone would get the money. Fairly. Right? But hey, free market.
Yeah.
And wage-based society, that's BS. So you're against the minimum wage, buddy? Get out of here. And the reason they could take those risks because they were born into wealth. They were born into money. So they could take the risk. The ordinary working class person can't take those risks. They can't just invest $5,000, $10,000 and just do something. No. Idiot.
So those are the ideas that actually, funny enough, have been repeated over and over again in our education system. The idea that, children or students in this country are taught that capitalism is evil is new to me, because I certainly did not get that type of education. Quite the opposite, in fact. Freedom is an interesting way of framing it, because the fact of the matter is, if you are financially stable, if you are, in the top 10% of the country, for instance, you probably feel incredibly free. You have options, endless options available to you. You probably have a nice nest egg. You have a little bit of that economic freedom. But, there are two different things at play. Number one, well, when you look at what is incentivized under capitalism, it's actually led to a lot of our own civil liberties being violated. For instance, data collection that takes place on a regular basis without our own knowledge by these social media companies, by these tech companies who make their money not off of advertising, for instance. They make the majority of their money off of selling our personal information to data brokers. It's part of the reason why there are infinite websites right now, so-called data brokers, that just sell our personal information, including where we live, what our phone number is, where we've worked. I don't really feel very free when I'm terrified about my own safety because there's a company that's literally making money off of selling my personal information. So there are certain incentives under capitalism that actually do infringe upon our civil liberties and our rights. So that's one thing that I want to note. But the other thing I want to note is, how free do you feel if you're on the precipice of financial ruin, if you can't afford paying for a medical emergency that you're experiencing? What do you do when you don't have health insurance, which tens of millions of Americans right now don't have because of the exorbitant prices associated with it? How free do you feel if you're a wage worker who has not experienced your real wages increase in literally decades? Wages have not kept up with
productivity.
Inflation.
Yeah,
so
inflation.
How free do you feel when you want to leave your job, but you can't because your healthcare benefits are tied to that work or tied to that job? I mean, freedom, again, is an interesting way of framing it, because I would venture to say that there's a significant portion of the population in the United States,
majority,
significant portion of workers in this country that do not, in fact, feel free, in fact, have experienced the precarious nature of a capitalistic system that forces them to work endlessly, if they're lucky, in a full-time job, if they're unlucky, in several part-time jobs that they cobble together with no benefits just to make ends meet.
Let me give you 30 seconds because I want to move on something.
Like how everyone clapped for Ben and literally just one person clapped for Ana. An absolute amazing monologue right there. Just killed it. Everything I was thinking, she put it into better words than I ever could. And she just, woof. Amazing job, Ana Kasparian. Absolutely amazing. Seriously, what a, sorry, I just got a notification. What an amazing freaking monologue, speech, whatever you want to call it. Amazing. Absolutely. I like how they flame it as freedom. It's not freedom when you're burdened by medical debt, when you can't afford to have higher education, you can't afford for your children to pre-K, as they call it, preschool. You can't send your kid to preschool. You can't have a family. You can't, afford that. You can't take a vacation. You can't do what you enjoy. How are you free? You're trapped. So capitalism doesn't give freedom to a majority of us. It gives freedom only to the private business owners, to those people, to the rich and the wealthy. It doesn't give a freedom to the rest of us. We're all trapped. You know what I mean? It exists in Canada too, not to the same extent in the US, but we still have our problems with capitalism. So yeah, that's bullshit that capitalism gives freedom. It doesn't. It takes away freedom from most of us and gives it to the private owners, the people who own the means of production, basically. Exactly.
I would just say I think that there's a bit of a definitional game that's very often played with the word freedom. Freedom obviously has two separate meanings. Isaiah Berlin talked extensively about the difference between positive liberty and negative liberty. What you're talking about are things that people need and things that people want, and that is not the same thing as liberty.
I'm talking about what people need. People need health care.
I don't disagree that people need health care, but to characterize that as a freedom is a very different thing. If the goal of the government is to provide you the opportunity to seek things, right, then that is not the same thing as the government providing those things to you directly. Nor is it the same thing as the government seizing that thing from one person and giving it to you here. To characterize it as freedom is a real mischaracterization. Again, I'm happy to discuss what.
It's not. No one's taking healthcare away from somebody else. It's like everyone gets healthcare, which allows you to have the freedom of not having medical debt, which allows you to have more money, which allows you to have more control over your life because you have more money, you can spend it on things that you want, which means you have more freedom. That's literally it, Ben. You're trying to say that, oh, well, you're trying to mischaracterize it as, oh, well, it's not freedom because they're giving it to you directly. Like, what?
Whether or not we should change the programming here, but I think that the sleight of hand that's played by equating freedom of speech, for example, or freedom from being murdered on the street, or freedom to dispose of your capital as you see fit, to characterize that in the same language that we'd use to discuss why you need a house. It's a difference in kind. It's apples and oranges.
Yeah. So let me just quickly mention.
Go ahead. I want to ask you a question.
Point,
go ahead.
Because this idea of taking something from one person and giving it to the redistribution issue, which I think oftentimes is framed inaccurately. You know, when we talk about redistribution of wealth, I mean, look at the amount of money that gets invested by our federal government in the form of research and development, whether we're talking about pharmaceutical companies or even companies like Tesla. The seed money from Tesla did not come from private investors. In fact, the same year that Obama's administration invested in the failed Solyndra project, they also invested the same amount into Tesla. And guess what? Tesla ended up being a massive success. The only downside to it, though, is that now you have Elon Musk who's whining and crying about having to pay his fair share of taxes when, during the pandemic, he became, for a brief period of time, the richest man literally in the world, right? So
I agree with you about subsidies, by the way.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Welcome to libertarianism.
So look, those investments need to be made. That research and development needs to take place because private investors are not willing to take the risks necessary. It's true.
That is fundamentally untrue.
The federal government's research and development is what led to the internet. I mean, it's a huge part of it.
The fact that the government is a grab bag of cash does mean that the government will eventually invest in some things that are worthwhile. It'll also invest in an awful lot of enormous piles of crap,
Okay,
right? The fact is, if you don't bear the risk of the downside, you're going to make a lot of bad investments.
We got a few more questions that I want to get through, and we've got 4.5 minutes. So, Ana, you had said earlier, comment about education.
Okay, before we go on, I have to comment on that. Yes, a lot of government funding is what allowed these things. Now I know, thanks to Ana, I know about that now, which only proves the point that you don't need capitalism for innovation. In fact, I think it gets in the way, like that other socialist site said, right? Yeah, like someone said right up there, Elon, Tony Stark wannabe Musk. Exactly. He's a wannabe Tony Stark, but not actually has any of the brains that Tony Stark does. So yeah, he's mad now that he has to pay his fair share of taxes, but he wasn't mad when the government was investing in Tesla, and Tesla obviously is a huge success. I mean, Elon Musk, she said at one point was the richest man in the world. He's around that ballpark still. So yeah, he's in that ballpark still. That's complete BS. So yeah, capitalism, in fact, I think gets in the way of innovation. And people make the argument capitalism is innovative compared to feudalism. Yeah, well, obviously, feudalism is worse than capitalism. But still, I think socialism would be way more innovative. Just because it's better than something doesn't mean that something can't be better than it. You know what I'm saying?
That people can choose to send their kids elsewhere. We are an organization that firmly believes in education choice, and we've got a lot of kids in this state and others that are sentenced to underperforming schools solely by virtue of their zip code. We tell families in this Commonwealth, that's your school. We would never tell them that's your supermarket, that's your doctor, that's your dentist, you get to choose.
Yeah, exactly.
And a lot of that, to be blunt, is because of the collective bargaining agreements with tenured teachers and how much you pay. Can we really get to educational choice? Because a lot of these parents can't afford to send their kids somewhere else. Can we really get to that real education choice given the current state of collective bargaining in this Commonwealth and in this country to a large degree?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to say something that's incredibly unpopular with this group, and that's totally fine. The best education in the world currently takes place in Finland. They have the top education model, and they have completely banned private education. I would do the same.
Okay, so first of all,
absolutely ban private education. Absolutely, it should be public education, should be accessible to everyone, free and high quality. We do not gatekeep quality of education behind prices, because then poor people and middle class people, such as myself, can't afford the ridiculous rates of higher education. Let's be real. Yeah. Basically, we can't afford it. But it should be accessible to everyone. So education provides opportunity. It provides the ability to have a great life. It's probably one of the most fundamental pillars of a good life is education. And if that's not accessible to everyone, and then how the hell can you expect everyone to have a great life, right? So absolutely, get rid of private education. Make sure all education is free and accessible to everybody from everywhere across the country. Whew! Absolutely.
Finland is not the United States, and there's a frequent attempt that it does happen a lot, where people will take something that has worked in Sweden or something that's worked in Norway or something that's worked in Finland, and they'll say, what if we just take that, import it here, and it'll work exactly the same way? And it typically does not work. The fact is that Finnish Americans make more money in the United States than they do in Finland, for example. They have longer life expectancies in the United States than they do in Finland. It's true of Swedish Americans, it's true of Nordic Americans.
Life expectancy in Finland is much higher than the United States.
No,
Yeah, that's bullshit. BS.
you're
In the
correct.
United
Hold on,
States,
hold on.
It's only 78 years.
No,
Which is, by the way,
Anna,
comparable
hold
to
on.
Cuba,
Anna,
78 years.
hold on a second. You're correct. The life expectancy in Finland is longer than life expectancy in the United States. That's not what I said. I said the life expectancy for Finnish Americans is longer in the
got it.
United States. That is an apples-to-apples comparison as opposed to comparing completely different populations, and that's kind of my point. Okay, the fact is that the United States has an incredibly diverse population, and that diverse population encompasses an enormous number of people who have very different beliefs about how education ought to be done. To suggest that any national standard of education is going to not only please all of those people, but prove to be successful in such a wide variety of circumstances for some 330 million people, we've tried this with a radically increasing federal education budget over the course of the last 30 years, and what we've got is failing public schools all over the United States, except in specific local areas where there have been attempts to take back control locally. I'd love to see more localization, and frankly, I'm quite pleased that if COVID had one decent effect, it was more people taking their kids out of the public schools.
Okay, I want to.
That's again BS. Public schools fail because again the funding is not handled correctly, and what they're being taught is bad. like just because the government has increased spending doesn't mean it's better. Like for example, the U.S. spends more money per capita on healthcare. Does that make their healthcare system good? Hell no. Like I said, if the money isn't spent correctly and done properly by the government, well then it's not gonna work. Which is why we need a better people in government and then a bigger government. We're not saying bigger government for the sake of bigger government, right? We have to put better people in government and then a better government. Anna thought she had him there, but he put her straight. Yeah, you're an idiot, hoser for life.
We got 2 minutes, and so before I get in trouble, so let's go real quick. And this might not be a quick one, but so we've had this discussion in this country, and a member of Congress has called for, and many others have, universal basic income. And her comment was, we should institute a basic universal income for those unwilling to work. Would that be supported in this country?
Would that be supported?
Yeah.
I think on a broad level, the answer is no. Although I think that as time goes on and people become more dependent on government, then the answer is probably getting closer to yes. Should it be supported in this country that people who are unwilling to work should be paid not to work? Absolutely not. I don't see why the government should be incentivizing people who don't want to work and have no excuse not to work.
I mean, look, this is an opinion. I have a different view of humanity, and I think most people want to live lives with purpose. So I think most people do, in fact, want to work. I mean, for me, universal basic income is not the end-all, be-all of dealing with the economic issues that people are having. I know that there's been a lot of focus on that because of Andrew Yang and his presidential run and his, demand that people get at least $1,000 a month. I don't think that that's going to solve the issues.
Yeah.
I think that we have deeper problems that we need to deal with, and just throwing money at something in the form of a universal basic income is not going to solve that issue. But if we decide, okay, maybe we're going to experiment with this on top of providing a much more robust social safety net, then maybe we're having a conversation. But to me, the issue of UBI is less interesting.
Okay, final question. We're almost out of time. They can't go over too long because then I get the hook. We've talked a lot about where we're going and a lot of pessimism and a lot of concerns. What gives you hope right now?
What gives me hope is the younger generation and just how fired up they are about experimenting with different solutions. Finally, we have a generation that's looking at what's being done in other countries, what's working, what isn't working. We're now seeing more worker co-ops being developed. In fact, there are as many as 1,000 worker co-ops in this
That's
country.
amazing.
About 500 of them are in the startup phase. But that is exciting news because now we're seeing companies being formed with workers actually owning the means of production. We're not talking about, the federal government owning the means of production. We're talking about actual workers
Owning the means of
making
production.
decisions democratically within the workplace. I think that's the right way to go about it. I love that it's being experimented with among younger workers, and I think that's the right way to go.
Ben, what gives you hope?
What gives me hope is the fact that because this is such a diverse country, and because what we are actually watching in real time is one of the great sorting features that we've seen in American public life in quite a while, right? We're seeing people like me move to Florida, we're seeing people who are in blue states want to stay in blue states, and what that's going to lead to is more diversity in terms of the attempted policies, and that in turn, I would hope, would lead to a couple of things. One, better empirical evidence as to what works and what doesn't. And two, I would really hope that it would lead people to look at the federal government and say, this is just something that cannot control the entire country at once with one giant rubric of rules. We have to let California be California, and we have to let Texas be Texas, and we have to let Florida be Florida. And if we can't agree to do that, when we're going to be locked in a never-ending battle for supremacy, and things are going to get very, very, very ugly before this is over. And I think that the
and there's nothing wrong with
socialism
socialism
right now is
someone just said on this guy's stream, public ownership of the means of production equals textbook definition of socialism. Yeah, that's a good thing.
Widely held belief that the solution is not at the local level and it's not at the state level, that it is all at the federal level, and what we ought to be arguing about each and every day is how much money and what sort of regulations we ought to pursue for 330 million people. The longer that continues, the more we're going to decide we don't actually want to be part of that body politic, that the rewards of being part of that body politic are not worth the risk of people you oppose taking control of that giant gun that is the government and pointing it at you. So I'm really hoping that some form of subsidiarity is going to...
you actually want to do that though, Ben. You want to take away abortion rights. You want to take away, you want to ban, you support the ban of CRT, which is basically banning civil rights things and women's suffrage unit. You want to take the big gun of government and point it at people you disagree with and don't do it. And shoot. So don't say that they want to do it. You want to do it. You authoritarians on the right, you're the ones who want to do it most. Not us lefties. You do. We want the government not to be a gun, but like a, how do I say this? I was trying to come up with a good analogy, but I can't. Not a gun, but a support system. Like a shield that protects people. Not a gun, right? So I think, that's BS. Your people, which I mean the Republicans and the right-wing party, you want to control people through the government. You want to take away abortion rights, women's reproductive rights. You want to take away people's right to freedom of education by banning certain things from school, like CRT, which is really a cover for banning civil rights things and women's suffrage movement and things and references to Ku Klux Klan. You're the ones who want to ban that. You're the ones who want to repeal mask mandates by using the government and saying you can't have mask mandates, forcing people not to wear masks like Rob DeSantis wants to do, and you're okay with that. You're the one who wants to use the government to oppress people. We want to have the government help us be free. That's a big difference. So that's BS, Ben.
To return, and that there will be some governmental figures who are willing to sort of reestablish the checks and balances and localism that were the hallmark of the Republic at the beginning and should be the hallmark of it again.
Look, I've enjoyed this conversation. Please thank Ana and Ben for being with us. It certainly was a lot of fun.
Good job, Ana.
And thanks to all of you for coming out. Appreciate it. Thanks.
Ladies and gentlemen, can we have one?
All right, we're done. So, what are my thoughts on the whole debate? Let's see. I think the debate was nice. I thought Ana obviously obliterated Ben. I think she did really well in a hostile crowd. She would, she did amazing. Wow. I've seen Ana debates before, but this might be her best performance. I think she came across really well. She reasonable, rational, calm, controlled, intelligent. She did everything right. Very good. Like 10 out of 10 performance. Absolutely amazing performance by Ana Kasparian. Ben, I thought, was definitely more civil than I've seen him in other debates. Like, I've seen him go a little more aggressive, I guess. But I think Ana was so good that he couldn't really. And she was... Ben's points, again, were always, as usual, they were stupid. I don't think they achieved anything. As I said on stream, I refuted many of those points. I think Ana handled it really well. They stayed within the time. They didn't talk over each other. This was a really good debate. All the comments on this stream are like, oh, civility. I don't care about civility. You know what I'm saying? Not really. I mean, as long as they don't start going into personal insults. But we should call out people when they're wrong, which Ana did. Yeah, I mean, these conversations prove to me that Ana's philosophy is way better than Ben's. And anyone who can't see that, I don't know how You can't see that. But yeah, this was an amazing conversation. I'm glad this happened. I hope more of these happen again with different lefties and righties going at each other, debating and exposing the idiotic right-wingers for what they are, which is idiots. And hopefully bringing their audience over to our side and saying, look, man, you've been misled by idiots. They've made you into idiots, but you can be better, right? That's basically should be a message. So this was really good. I'm glad this happened. Yeah, I don't have much to say. I said everything during the debate. If you guys like the video, please like and subscribe. Hit the bell button if you want to see every video. Follow me on Twitch. And if you're on Twitch, follow me on YouTube. I even have a Twitter, but I usually just retweet stuff. I'm not very active on that platform. But if you want to follow me there, you can follow me there. Alright, see you all on the next stream, Politics Stream number 13.